Gem, and we have for you now a bit of a world first, because Mercer's Cost of Living Index for 2023 has been put together, and more because of time zones than because we're important, we are actually breaking it here, globally here, on the Business Breakfast. We're the first people to have it. We're the first people to announce who is ranked where in this big piece of data we put together by the guys at Mercer to see which are the most expensive expat cities around the world. I'm not going to steal his thunder, but I am going to introduce him. Vladimir Vrzhovski is the Financial Services and Technologies Industry Lead at Mercer Middle East. Vladimir, it's lovely to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Good morning.
And I'll leave the honours to you. We obviously are interested in both where Dubai and Abu Dhabi rank on this index. Where are we?
So we have seen quite a lot of movement this year compared to the previous years. And we've seen that Dubai and Abu Dhabi both have jumped in the rankings. Now, Dubai has jumped about 13 spots up to now 18th, and Abu Dhabi has jumped about 18 spots up to about 43, I believe. So there is still a large gap between actually Dubai and Abu Dhabi. However, from a grand scheme of things, what we see is that Hong Kong remained first, same as last year. Singapore is up now second. So Singapore has seen sort of that big jump from 8th or 9th place now to the second place. And that's primarily driven to the same macroeconomic issues that Dubai is facing. And then we have a mix of European and American cities in those top 10. And after that, obviously, we see a bit of a movement on the rest of the ranking. However, it's important to mention that the ranking is not only looking at the city itself, but also what can happen is that a ranking be pushed up by a lot of cities dropping below the rank, right? So technically, it's a kind of like a floating scale that we publish year on year.
Oh, Richard made the point earlier that there obviously is a global cost of living crisis. Inflation has been the story for the first half of 2023. But as you say, it's how much we're rising compared to others. What is our rate of cost appreciation, if you like, doing compared to other cities?
Yeah. So I'll talk more in terms of Mercer's cost of living, right? Because our methodology is very different from a CPI methodology, right? So it's very difficult to compare apple to apple. It's not apple to apple in that case. Where we see is that on general, when we're looking at, for example, supermarket items, we're about 11% up. When we're looking at transportation, we're about 5% up. Utilities, more or less, we're at the same level. Where we see is primarily consumer items has gone up.
For the UAE?
For the UAE in general. Now, the major ticket item, where what makes the difference between Dubai and Abu Dhabi is the cost of renting, cost of real estate. Where we see is that the average are quite different, right? We see the averages in Dubai at about 25%, and that's an average compared to very different areas, right? In some areas, we see movement of about 10 to 15%. In certain, we see actually over 60% movement. If we average that out, it's about 25% overall.
And Abu Dhabi?
Abu Dhabi is a lot less. I think it's around the 10% mark, but we also see in a lot of areas in Abu Dhabi that remain flat as well.
Okay, so that's the difference between the two cities. How much of that cost growth, particularly when we're talking about real estate, about rent, is inevitable with a growing population?
I think it's very interesting that in this year's survey, Singapore and Dubai are the only cities that have an average growth in rent of over 25%. So Singapore is actually at 35%. Singapore is actually even higher than the growth rate of Dubai. And I think that's primarily driven by the lack of supply in the market. And obviously that is sort of driven by demand. Similarly here, we see that happening quite a lot. The pressure is out there, obviously. And when we add that on the rest of the ticket items in that basket, it does actually contribute to a significant amount.
Okay, well, let's talk about affordability and attractiveness then, because you point out in this report that on one hand, these rising numbers are a sign of economic growth, which is great.
Yep.
But we are an expat destination. Those cities you mentioned we're in competition with in some schemes, Singapore, Hong Kong. Affordability and attractiveness is important. Are these really lists that we want to move up?
These are not the lists that we want to move up per se, right? Again, when we want to look at this in isolation, we want to look at it at a micro level. What's happening currently, right? And what's driving my cost personally. However, if we look at the grand index, we're looking to where would I organizations are typically looking at where would I place my executives, where do I place my top talent, how do I move my talent efficiently and effectively, and that's from a cost, but also from a quality of living perspective as well. Now, we are in a good bucket in Dubai, right? Because we want to compare ourselves with the Singapores, with the Londons, with the Amsterdams, right? Because this is where the top talent sits. Now, a lot of these cities are not going through an exponential growth as Dubai would, but at the same time, we do see that would cause a bit of a pressure on organizations to understand how to compensate for that cost in particular.
Right, and that's the second half of this report, isn't it? You speak to the HR departments, you find out what they are doing. So here in Dubai, are they compensating for cost of living?
Indirectly, yes. Directly, not. Right. So what we have actually seen is that very often organizations do not factor in inflation into their merit increase calculation. What does that mean? Is that typically we look into the economic environment. If the economic environment is good, we have post profit. We have grown. We would pay a higher percentage of merit increase year on year. Now, based on our survey, we have seen about 4.2%. Growth in base salary, but again, there's a bit of difference here when we talk about salary growth, because typically our basic salary growth, right? The compensation composition in the GCC is very different than the rest of the world, right? So if our basic salary grows at 4%, actually grows a lot less overall, right? Because we do have the housing and transportation allowances, which are sort of guaranteed. But what we've seen a big change this year is that actually we have seen the housing allowances starting being revised, and that hasn't happened for quite a lot of time. Now, it's not that every company has started revising those. However, from our survey, we have seen about 40% in that survey list that the companies have sort of decided that they need to revise their housing allowances to address a lot of the pressure that they're getting from the market. And that movement is typically between 5 and 10% on those allowances.
5 to 10% though in a housing allowance. I mean, rent, as you say, what did you put the average at? 25%?
25 probably, yeah.
Is it enough?
It's not enough. However, the housing allowance was never meant to fully sort of compensate and follow the market movement. When the market dropped, we didn't really see a housing allowance reduction at the same time, right? So we're trying to see here long term what is the best way for organizations to maintain this and support the purchasing power of employees. And they're doing that through various channels, I would say, right? One of them is adjusting the allowances, adjusting salaries, but also we have seen actually a higher bonus payout last year. Of course, economic environment would play a big difference in the bonus payout, but at the same time, companies would be a bit sort of more cautious of not maybe increasing base salaries too high, knowing that the cost of living, if we call it crisis, would sort of start calming down a bit, right? The expectation is to come down. And this is why typically we have this sort of different type of movement and understanding.
Vladimir Vrzhovski, unfortunately, we do have to leave it there this morning. We appreciate your time and for breaking that news first on the Business Breakfast. The Financial Services and Technologies Industry Lead at Mercer Middle East, thank you.
Dubai Eye 103.8.
Join the conversation.